My name is Jakob. I'm a senior researcher at Research Institutes of Sweden. I work in sustainable transports and systems. RISE is a publicly owned applied research institute. So we are not for profit, but we still do applied research as opposed to universities that do a lot more core research. My computer is okay. There we go. So I have been doing research into road transport electrification for about 8 years, with and without ERS. And a lot of these studies are based on simulations. Almost all of it is data-driven. And if you want to know where these claims I will make come from, then there's a list of publications at the end, and I believe the slides will be distributed to all participants. So the first strong emerging property of ERS, the effect it has on road freight, is that it strengthens the incentives to electrify. What does this mean? It means that more trucks have a cost incentive to go for electric, and if you just look at it as all of them need to do electric anyway, then we will reach that stage much earlier than we would if we only do static charging. And as has been explained, ERS is not instead of static charging. We're talking about adding one more component, dynamic charging, into the charging ecosystem of Europe. And the main reason we improve these economic incentives is that we lower the capital expenses through the battery reductions, and somewhere 50 to 70% is also the capacity reduction that emerges in my own simulations. This seems to be very consistent across studies from different countries and different institutes. ERS would cost a lot more to build than fast charging stations would, but you cannot compare that. You need to compare it on a per delivered energy basis. And an ERS system would also deliver a lot of energy that otherwise comes from the private charging infrastructure. And therefore, the total investment in infrastructure is similar, actually. You do get a reduction in operative costs as well. Most likely, ERS charging would end up costing somewhere 25 to 30 euro cents per kilowatt hour, including taxes. If the ERS operator wants to maximize profits, then they want to set a low price to get a high utilization. Since some of that will be replacing maybe megawatt charging and some of that will be replacing depot charging, you end up with similar total charging costs. However, as David explained, you don't need to stop for charging. You don't need to wait for charging. You are much more flexible. You can organize your logistics in the way you want. So in this sense, you do get lower operating costs as well. If you look at the longer time horizon, if we assume that batteries decrease so much in weight and price that they become free and weight nothing, then most likely some of these operational freedoms still persist. Saying where and when ERS is profitable to build and for whom is of course tricky. This is an approximate view. What it shows is that in these dark purple, dark red areas, the traffic is sufficiently dense that if you build ERS here and you only build it for trucks, so with the overhead catenary line that Michael presented, you will have enough, you will have a good business case here. There's a very low risk investment to build here if you build today. If you want to later expand it, or if your customers want the network to be expanded, then we enter this pinkish area. And there, traffic might not be sufficient if we look only at heavy-duty traffic, especially not if we look only at long-haul heavy-duty traffic. And here you might need to introduce either a state-backed price cap for charging, which my own studies indicate would still be a socioeconomically efficient policy. That wouldn't be a long-term subsidy, more like a reallocation of money flows so that you reduce the total societal cost. But you could also introduce light-duty traffic, and then we're not talking about charging all light-duty traffic. Everybody who has private charging would probably still charge mainly through their own private charging at home. But there is a segment of light-duty traffic, maybe 15% of cars and taxis, some vans, that together add up quite a lot of electricity. So if you can take a significant share of that charging, then you can get a business case for also the pinkish area. For the blue, this is likely only viable economically if you do a joint solution for heavy-duty and light-duty vehicles, and you get installation costs that reduce over time as you build this out. And if you were to build all of this, I think all of the blue, then the investment cost to build this entire network is still less than 1 year of fossil fuel imports to run these vehicles. And then ERS has so far been discussed in Europe as a solution for long-haul trucks, which drive on highways, and it's likely slightly cheaper to build on the big highways than it is to build where the highway passes through a city. But since we have economies of scale, relatively fixed infrastructure cost, regardless of how many users we want to maximize the number of users to get the lowest infrastructure cost per user. And this is so that we create the maximum incentives for the long-haul trucks to use this infrastructure. And we also said that we can build a larger network scope is viable if we have more users using this. And that is also something that benefits the long-haul trucks. So this makes it very complex. So even though we cannot motivate ERS by needing to electrify car traffic, the ERS network itself, there's still an incentive for the investor to include them, quite possibly. This is ongoing research still. And I don't have evidence that car users want to use ERS, even if it's there. But I do have evidence that car owners without private parking, so rely on public parking, they lag far behind others in EV adoption. And we also have evidence that urban cars drive, at least in Sweden, about 30 to 50% of the daily distance on motorways. And this means that if you put the ERS on just the main roads, the motorways inside cities, that would be enough to keep these vehicles running. So if you were to build this, how much impact would you have? So we would go probably from the blue line, which is about as ambitious as we can be with only static charging, to this gold orange line. So we are not going to have a massive, fast reduction in CO2 emissions, but we might reach, there is a potential at least, to reach zero emissions from European road transport by 2050. And then we include all of Eastern Europe in that. We will still not be anywhere near making the road transport sector align with other emissions reductions targets for Europe. And we will not meet the 40% reduction goal for 2030 that has been set for road transport. So where will that reduction in emissions come from? A little bit of it is that we might increase new electric vehicle sales, especially for trucks. But most likely that ERS network will only be in place by the time that new vehicle sales have already almost reached 100%. So if we talk only about CO2 emission reductions, we can only really affect the embodied emission reductions of cars if we reduce their battery capacities. the emission reductions from the embodied emissions from trucks are not significant. However, if we do enable up to a 70% reduction in battery capacity, that greatly improves the business case for doing a mid-life conversion of a combustion engine vehicle to electric. It also resolves one of, not the only, but one of the main engineering problems, which is that you cannot add more weight to the vehicle than you remove. Again, I cannot prove that ERS would trigger mass conversion of vehicles, but that pathway would be the only one that really accelerates decarbonization of Europe, if ERS can actually accelerate electrification of the rolling stock of combustion engine vehicles. David talked a bit about how ERS would reduce the need for other static charging. And there is definitely more research to be done here. My own simulations indicate that if you build an ERS network with the Swedish road network layout, you're reducing the need for this public rest stop charging, megawatt charging, or at least very fast charging, by about 50-60%. The destination charging, so that would be the logistics terminals, by about half. And you're reducing the total installed capacity for depot charging by about 25%. So we have these numbers, they're similar to David's numbers, but scaled up for Europe. If we go only for static charging infrastructure, we need a lot of it, and we need a lot of grid connections. We haven't even touched upon how many chargers we need to build for cars. And how long will this take to build? I don't know. I cannot say that this is impossible, but it is very, very challenging. And if we transition to ERS, then the simulations indicate this would use about 50% of all the energy to trucks. All trucks, not only long haul. And not only on the ERS network, but actually in the entire national transport system. We would have much fewer grid connections. It would take about 10 to 15 years to build, as opposed to an unknown figure here. And you would reduce probably about 50% of the energy, but it's a little unclear still how many of the chargers you would remove, how many of the grid connections, how much of the grid power load. Still, the research indicates that you would smooth out the load in the grid from all vehicle charging. So you would go from a huge peak at night and a smaller peak at lunchtime to a more level load. And primarily, ERS is an insurance policy. What I mean by that. But in the simulations I've run that look at lots of different scenarios, lots of different possible developments in the future, we might go into a future, and this is the one we hope for, where all traffic is electrified, even if we don't build ERS. It will take a while. We still need to phase out all of those combustion engine vehicles that we're still selling today, which is most of them. But it's also possible that various quite non-intuitive factors that I don't have time to go into make this transition more difficult than we hope it is. And in that case, we're not going to succeed in electrifying all the traffic. But if we build ERS, then these simulation outcomes are much more robust to these disturbances in assumptions. So we don't have ERS today, but if we did, we would already be at a much lower transport system cost, because we wouldn't need to put so much batteries in the vehicles, and many, many more vehicles would already be electric. We're not there, but we can transition to there in about 10, 15 years. And then we can be almost guaranteed to end up in the best case, rather than maybe in the best case. And to delay what I want to finish with is that to delay ERS construction is a decision. That's an active decision we can make. But that decision, at least in my own simulations, has an outcome that is worse than early ERS construction in all simulated scenarios. So it's not one we can recommend. Waiting is not the preferred choice. And if you want to look into publications, they will be here in the slides afterwards. Thank you.